Hello everyone and welcome to my channel YNR Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The chaos that consumed Genoa City on the night Kyle Abbott took his final breath began much earlier. Long before anyone realized how deep Holden's obsession ran, how dangerously his jealousy twisted into something monstrous, and how one unforgivable decision would shatter Claire's world forever. It started with whispers, strange vanishing acts, late-night messages, and Holden's impossible explanations that never quite added up. But Kyle, trusting, determined, protective, kept brushing away the shadows, believing that everything could be fixed with enough truth, enough courage, enough love. But darkness has a way of creeping through even the strongest of defenses, and Holden was not a man who tolerated rivals, especially not the one man who could expose every lie he had carefully constructed. Kyle had been investigating quietly for weeks, pushing aside warnings, ignoring Claire's trembling pleas for caution, determined to bring justice not only for the secrets Holden kept but also for the danger he represented. And that danger finally erupted the moment Holden realized Kyle had uncovered everything. His hidden accounts, the falsified documents, the threats he made in Claire's name, the manipulation he used to force her away from everyone she loved. Kyle confronted him near the old abandoned storage yard. The one place in Genoa City where the echoes of past sins still clung to the walls like ghosts, and Holden, cornered, desperate, eyes burning with a madness no one had seen before, lashed out with terrifying speed. Words were exchanged, sharp, brutal, raw. Kyle told him the game was over, that Claire deserved freedom, that the truth would come out no matter how hard Holden tried to bury it. Holden snarled in response, his voice breaking into a rage-filled promise that if he couldn't have Claire, no one would, not even Kyle. And then, without a moment's hesitation, he lunged. The blow was fast, violent, final. A strike meant not to injure but to end. Kyle stumbled backward, shock flashing across his face as his hand pressed instinctively to the wound blooming dark and warm beneath his fingers. He gasped, confused, his breath trembling as he collapsed onto the cold concrete. Holden stood above him, chest heaving, whispering something about how Kyle should have stayed out of his way, but panic soon replaced his fury when he realized Kyle was no longer fighting back. Holden ran, cowardly, quietly, leaving Kyle to die alone. But Kyle would not be alone for long, because Claire, who had followed them from a distance after noticing Holden's strange behavior, arrived just moments later. She froze when she saw the lifeless shape on the ground. Her scream split the night, echoing through the yard like the shattering of glass as she fell to her knees, hands trembling violently as she pulled Kyle into her arms, begging him to look at her, begging him to breathe, begging him not to leave her. Kyle's eyelids fluttered weakly, his face pale but still impossibly gentle, as if he wanted his last moments to comfort her instead of terrify her. "Claire?" he whispered, barely audible, his voice trembling against the cold. She sobbed his name, clutching him closer as she begged him to stay awake, to stay with her, to fight the darkness stealing him away. And Kyle tried, God, he tried. But the wound was too deep, the damage too severe, and the clock had already begun counting down the final seconds of his life. Claire cradled him, her tears falling onto his cheek as she pressed her forehead to his, rocking back and forth in a desperate attempt to keep him conscious. Kyle's hand, shaking, lifted to touch her face, smearing her tears with blood as he whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't listen. I should have stayed with you." Claire shook her head, refusing to accept the apology, telling him none of this was his fault, telling him he would be fine, telling him help was coming, though the lie tasted like poison on her tongue. Kyle coughed, pain flickering across his expression, but his eyes never left hers. He looked at her with so much love, so much regret, so much understanding, as if everything he'd ever felt was being poured into this one final moment. "Remember," he whispered faintly, his breath uneven, You saved me. Not tonight but every day. You saved me, Claire." He struggled for air, blood catching in his throat. "Don't forget that. Don't forget us." Claire sobbed harder, clutching his hand to her heart as she begged him to stay, begged him not to say goodbye, begged him to fight. But Kyle's gaze softened, and he managed a weak smile, one that broke her soul in half, before whispering the words that would haunt her forever. "I love you. Always." And then, with one final breath that trembled between them like a fading heartbeat, his hand slipped from hers. His eyes went still. His chest stopped rising. And Claire let out a scream so painful it felt like the entire world cracked open. For several minutes she couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't exist. She simply held him, rocking his lifeless body against her own as she whispered his name over and over again, desperate to rewind time to bring him back, to undo everything that had just happened. The silence around her was suffocating, heavy with finality, but something inside her, something fierce, something broken, something burning, ignited through the agony. Slowly, gently, she laid Kyle down on the ground, brushing the hair from his forehead before kissing him one last time. Her tears dripped onto his cold skin as she whispered, I'll remember everything. And then with a grief that transformed into something terrifyingly sharp, she stood. What Claire didn't know was that Holden hadn't run far. Cowards like him never disappeared completely. They lingered in the shadows, watching, waiting, hoping their sins might somehow be erased by distance. He was hiding behind the rusted metal wall, breathing hard, panicked, furious that Claire had arrived sooner than he expected. Claire's grief sharpened her senses. She knew he was still there. She could feel the weight of his presence like a poisonous fog pressing against her. And when she turned, slowly, deliberately, Holden's blood ran cold. Her eyes were no longer soft or frightened. They were burning with a promise. He would pay. He stumbled backward as Claire stepped toward him, her voice shaking violently as she demanded to know why he would do something so monstrous, why he would kill the one man who never wanted to hurt anyone, why he would destroy her life because of his twisted obsession. Holden tried to defend himself, tried to argue that he did it for love, that Kyle was in the way, that Claire needed to be protected from the Abbott family's chaos. But every word only fueled her fury. She advanced until he was backed against the wall, trembling as her rage boiled over, and for the first time in Holden's life, he was afraid of her. Claire didn't strike him, not yet, but her voice cut deeper than any weapon. She told him that Kyle died protecting her from the very monster now looking at her with wide, panicked eyes. She told him she would never forgive him. She told him that whatever future he imagined with her was dead the moment he touched Kyle. Holden begged her not to go to the police, insisting it was an accident, insisting he hadn't meant to kill him, insisting Kyle was threatening him. Claire shook her head with absolute certainty. She had seen the scene with her own eyes. She knew exactly what had happened. And when Holden reached out to touch her, she shoved him back with enough force that he stumbled and fell. Her voice cracked as she screamed at him never to touch her again, never to speak her name, never to exist in the same breath as her. The sound of her anger shattered something inside Holden, revealing the pathetic, trembling coward beneath the manufactured charm he used to manipulate everyone around him. Claire called the police with a steady, unwavering voice. She stayed beside Kyle's body, protecting his final resting place until officers arrived. When they pulled Holden from the shadows, he tried to run again, but Claire's scream, filled with righteous fury, froze him mid-stride. He was dragged away, kicking and sobbing, insisting he only meant to scare Kyle, that he didn't realize what he had done. But Claire knew better. Everyone did. Kyle Abbott had been murdered. The news spread through Genoa City like wildfire. Jack collapsed when he saw his son's lifeless body covered by a white sheet. Summer fainted at the police station the moment Claire told her what happened. Diane wailed so loudly that even the officers turned away, unable to look at the agony etched across her face. And Claire stood beside them all, covered in Kyle's blood, her clothes torn, her eyes swollen and empty. She repeated Kyle's last words softly, almost to herself. "Remember, you saved me." Those words followed her everywhere. In the hospital hallway where she washed the blood from her hands, in the police station where she gave her statement, in the Abbott mansion where silence replaced the warmth Kyle once filled. She held onto those words like a lifeline, like a promise, like a haunting echo that refused to fade. And when she visited Kyle's body for the final goodbye, she placed her hand on his chest and whispered, "I'll carry you with me. Always." Kyle's death was not just a tragedy, it was a turning point. A devastating fracture that rippled through the Abbott family, the Newman family, and especially Claire, who vowed that Holden would never again see the light of day. She testified with unwavering clarity. She described every moment, every word, every breath. And when the judge declared Holden guilty, Claire finally allowed herself to collapse, the weight of grief crushing her like a tidal wave. But she held on to one truth: Kyle didn't die afraid. He died in her arms. And his last words were filled with love, gratitude, and hope. And Claire swore she would honor them. She would remember. She would survive. She would live in a way that made his sacrifice mean something. And somewhere beyond pain, beyond loss, beyond broken hearts, Kyle Abbott's final whisper lingered in the air. Remember, you saved me. The days following Kyle Abbott's death unfolded like a nightmare that refused to end. An endless loop of grief, rage, guilt, and disbelief that wrapped itself around Genoa City and squeezed until every breath felt like a battle. And Claire, who once walked with quiet hope and cautious optimism, now moved like a ghost through the world, haunted not only by the memory of Kyle's final breath, but by the crushing reality that the man she loved died in her arms, whispering words she could not escape. No matter how far she ran or how tightly she closed her eyes, the Abbott mansion, normally filled with the warmth of family, became a monument of sorrow. Every creak of the staircase, every echo from the hallway, every abandoned coffee mug felt like a cruel reminder that Kyle would never return, never flash that half-smile when he thought no one noticed, never brush past Claire with that soft, unspoken affection they had barely begun to understand. Jack drifted through the house like a man who had lost not only a son but a piece of his soul, staring at Kyle's childhood photos as if trying to memorize every detail in case memory failed him. Diane refused to sleep, sitting beside Kyle's empty bed with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white, whispering apologies into the darkness for every argument, every mistake, every moment she wished she could take back. Summer visited once, collapsing in Jack's arms before running out again, unable to face the weight of what had happened, unable to accept that the father of her child had been taken from the world by someone who never deserved a moment of Kyle's kindness. Harrison kept asking where his dad was, and each time the family lied, just until they could figure out how to shatter a child's innocence with the truth that should never touch someone so young. Claire was the one who broke first. She tried to be strong, tried to keep breathing, tried to honor Kyle's final whisper. Remember, you saved me. But the guilt was a vicious storm, swirling through her chest until it drowned out everything else. She went everywhere Kyle had been in his final weeks: Crimson Lights Society, the park bench where they shared their first quiet conversation, searching for a piece of him, searching for meaning, searching for any sign that she could have changed this, stopped this, prevented the man she loved from falling into Holden's monstrous obsession. But each place only brought her more pain, memories flooding into her with such force she could barely stand upright. She replayed the moment of his death in an endless loop, the way his fingers trembled as they brushed her cheek, the way his eyes softened even as the light faded from them, the way his voice broke on the final "I love you." Those words, meant to comfort her, became shackles around her heart, dragging her deeper into grief until she could barely speak without choking on tears. But grief was not the only force rising in Genoa City. Beneath the sorrow simmered something darker, something that spread like wildfire through the families and the people who loved Kyle. Anger. Unrelenting, blistering anger at the man who took Kyle's life. Holden, now locked in a cell, insisted every day that it was an accident, that he panicked, that he loved Claire and merely wanted to protect her from Kyle's supposed manipulation. But the police reports painted a different picture. One of obsession, domination, premeditation. Claire's statement alone was devastating, her voice steady as she described exactly what she saw, exactly how Kyle fought for her, exactly how Holden struck him with the intention of ending his life. The prosecutor listened attentively, nodding as Claire detailed every moment, every breath, every scream. She never faltered, even when tears threatened to spill down her cheeks. She held them back with clenched fists and unbroken resolve, because she owed that to Kyle. She owed him truth, she owed him justice, she owed him the strength he always believed she possessed. The city rallied around the Abbott family, though the condolences felt hollow, insufficient in the face of such devastation. Victor Newman sent security to guard the family 24/7. Not because they asked but because Victor understood the depths of vengeance that tragedies like this could provoke. Nikki visited Claire privately, offering compassion that surprised everyone. Even Victoria, who had once doubted Claire, looked at her with quiet remorse, acknowledging silently that Claire had suffered more than any of them ever imagined. Sharon offered the only comfort that seemed to reach her. A quiet place at Crimson Lights where Claire could sit without being approached, without being asked questions, without being pitted. But no one, not even those who cared deeply for her, could touch the grief that wrapped around Claire like a second skin. And then came the funeral. A cold, gray morning settled over Genoa City as if the sky itself mourned the loss of Kyle Abbott. The chapel overflowed with people. Friends, rivals, colleagues, family members. Every one of them stunned into silence as they stared at the portrait of Kyle smiling back at them, vibrant, alive, frozen in a moment that now felt impossibly distant. Claire sat in the front row between Jack and Diane, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she clutched the folded letter she had written the night before. A letter she never planned to read aloud but couldn't bear to leave unsaid. When the priest invited her to speak, Claire rose slowly, the weight of grief pressing down on her like a physical force. The crowd watched her, stunned by the rawness in her expression, the tremor in her breath, the devastation written in every small movement. She stepped to the podium, unfolding the letter with trembling fingers, and when she finally spoke, her voice cracked like shattering glass. She told them about Kyle's kindness, the small quiet kind that most people never noticed. She spoke of the way he listened, truly listened without judgment. She spoke of how he looked at her like she was worth saving, even when she didn't believe it herself. She told them about his smile, the one that appeared when he tried not to laugh, the one she saw in the moments when he looked at her with a gentleness that made her feel safe for the first time in years. And then she told them about his last words, "Remember, you saved me." And the chapel fell into a silence so profound that even the air seemed to hold still. Her voice broke entirely when she admitted she didn't feel like she had saved him at all, that she felt she had failed him, that if she had just been braver or faster or stronger, maybe Kyle would still be alive. Jack rose from his seat then, placing a trembling hand on her shoulder as she struggled to breathe through her sobs. She finished by promising Kyle she would honor his memory, promising she would keep fighting for justice, promising she would not let his final words become twisted by her own guilt. After the service, the town followed the Abbott family to the gravesite. Claire stood over the casket, her heart pounding so violently she thought she might faint. When the time came to place a white rose on top, she hesitated, because this was final. This was goodbye. Her fingers brushed the rose's petals as she whispered the same words Kyle had whispered to her. "I love you. Always." And then, with hands that trembled like fragile glass, she let the rose fall. That night, Claire couldn't return to her hotel room. She wandered through the city aimlessly until she found herself at the storage yard, the place where Kyle died. She stood exactly where she had knelt with his body in her arms, the cold wind whipping around her as tears streamed down her cheeks. And then something inside her shifted. The grief didn't lessen, but it transformed slowly, painfully, into a fierce, burning determination. Holden had taken the love of her life. She would take everything from him in return, not through violence, not through revenge, but through truth, through justice, through exposing every dark secret he thought he buried. Because Holden had secrets. Many. And Claire was finally ready to uncover them all. She went to the police the next morning, asking to speak to Detective Chavez. She explained that Holden's obsession didn't begin with Kyle, that it went back years, tied to another case, another disappearance, another woman who escaped him but never came forward. Claire had pieced together fragments of Holden's past, but now she was determined to connect every thread. Chavez listened carefully, his expression shifting from doubt to horror as Claire outlined the timeline, the evidence, the patterns. Her voice was steady, colder than ice. When she finished, the detective thanked her, then immediately assembled a team to reopen files previously considered unrelated. Claire stayed for hours answering questions, offering insights, helping uncover the monster Holden truly was. Meanwhile, Holden sat alone in his cell, pacing back and forth, occasionally shouting that none of this was his fault. His desperation grew each day, especially when he realized Claire wasn't visiting him, wasn't sending messages, wasn't giving him even a shred of attention. In his delusion, he believed she would forgive him, believed she would come around, believed Kyle's death would somehow free her. But when news reached him that Claire was helping the police build a case not just for murder, but for crimes stretching years into the past, Holden snapped completely. He threatened the guards. He demanded to see Claire. He screamed until his voice disappeared, howling that she was his, that Kyle had deserved what he got, that Claire didn't understand what love meant. His outbursts only strengthened the case against him. Claire didn't attend the trial. Not at first. But when the prosecutor asked her to testify about the night Kyle died, she agreed, because she owed that to Kyle, to herself, and to the truth. The courtroom fell silent when she walked in, her expression calm, controlled, almost chilling in its focus. Holden looked at her like a starving animal, desperate and furious, but Claire didn't even glance at him. She sat on the witness stand and told the truth, her voice unwavering even as she described the moment Kyle collapsed in her arms. The jury members watched her with a mixture of sympathy and admiration. When Holden tried to interrupt her testimony, shouting that she was lying, the judge ordered him restrained. Claire didn't flinch. She continued until every detail was laid bare, until every person in that room understood the depth of Kyle's love and the darkness of Holden's cruelty. When the verdict finally came, guilty on all counts, Claire felt her knees buckle. Not from relief, not from victory, but from the overwhelming weight of everything she had carried since the night Kyle died. Jack caught her before she fell. Diane pulled her into a trembling embrace. And for the first time since that terrible night, Claire allowed herself to breathe. Not because the pain was gone, it never would be, but because Kyle finally had justice. In the weeks that followed, Claire struggled to rebuild the shattered pieces of her life. She visited Kyle's grave often, talking to him as if he were still beside her, telling him about the progress of Holden's sentencing, the changes in Harrison's routine, the way Jack had placed fresh flowers in Kyle's room every morning. She told him she missed him every second of every day, that she still heard his last words in her dreams, that she would never forget him. Not in this lifetime, not in any. The Abbott family slowly welcomed Claire into their home, not as a replacement, not as a burden, but as someone who loved Kyle deeply and authentically. Someone who was part of him. Someone who carried his heart in hers. And though the pain remained, though the nights were still heavy with memories, though her heart still ached every time she walked past a place Kyle once stood, Claire held on to his final whisper. "Remember, you saved me," and allowed those words to become her guide, her comfort, her strength. Because Kyle Abbott may have died in her arms, but his love lived in her forever.